Hello and welcome to my recap of round 4 of the 2024 FIDE candidates. GM Max here, and for our first game, we're seeing this draw between Nakamura against Pragnananda, where we see White playing the move d3 as a way to avoid the open Spanish that was played in round 1 between Furusha and Pragnananda. So with d3, it does allow Black to play bishop c5 in a somewhat better version, as we see in the game. There's now, in this case, we don't have c3 and d4 so easily to attack the bishop on c5. And the move of d6 is h6 is a small wrinkle by Prague, just avoiding something like a bishop to g5 pin, which would be a little bit unpleasant in this version for Black. So h6 just avoids that, and you can sort of tell by Nakamura's choice here that he was just wanting to play very safely in this game, going for the move of bishop to e3. Leading to this structure after takes with the cluster of pawns that, is quite safe for White. You do get some play down the f-file, but where Black, of course, is also going to be very solid, as White does struggle a little bit to find a good pawn break in this position. Like g4, g5, for instance, would also open up the White king quite considerably. And with knight e7, knight c3, and bishop e6, we can kind of say that, Black is also happy to hoover off all the pieces and just maintain the balance. No, I think that perhaps applying like knight h4 and trying to bring a knight this way might have been a bit more ambitious. The way Nakamura played it, knight d2, knight e2 is a little bit passive, but doesn't, do any special harm to his position. And yeah, once you have this very symmetrical structure, it's pretty clear that the game is going to end in a draw one way or another. And because they can't agree a draw before move 40, the players just came up with this logical repetition of moves and, just ended the game like that. So, not the most interesting game, but, we get it out of the way and, a result where Prague is happy to draw with Black against one of the top seeds. And yeah, for Nakamura, also happy to make a draw and kind of, recover from the round 2 defeat, as it were. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, do make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. Turns out that there is actually a new clear leader of this candidates tournament after this round. But you'll have to wait until near the end of the video to find out who that is, in case you don't know already. For the next game, this was between Abbasov against Furusha. And I think that Furusha, given that he was on 1 out of 3, along with Abbasov before this game, it's a game where both players would like to win, but certainly Furusha, wanting to maximize his chances. And, it's true that the queen c2 line is nowadays considered, relatively reliable for Black, based on this Kramnik variation, where you take on c4 and play b6, bishop a6 and stuff. But it turns out that the move d6 that Furusha played, it's an alternative to keep more tension in the position and have some flexibility in the structure, let's say. White plays the move e3, which is a very good response here. Bishop d3, c5, and yeah, the reason I stopped playing this system as White is that after knight e2, White just gets a quite significantly improved version of the Rubinstein Nimzo, where, d6, c5 doesn't really gel that well together somehow. But in the game, dc5 as played by Abbasov is also a very good move here. After bishop c5, knight f3, I think we can reasonably say that White got a tiny edge out of the opening, and, to Furusha's credit, he realized that, if you just play normal moves like knight c6 and say, for example, you play a6, like you're just going to end up in a very passive position where the d pawn is a bit of a weakness. And, well, you could even castle long and just go for like g4, g5 and just really hack Black's king here. So Furusha realized, trying to keep all attention in the position would just lead to a very bad situation. So he plays a move d5 and just basically plays for equality. White could have played takes if he wanted an IQP position, but maybe he was a little bit concerned about the queen perhaps not being ideally placed on c2 here. Though, to be fair, I think even this position should still be a little bit better for White with the pressure against the d-pawn, but it would just be a very different position to what arose, where in the game Abbasov said, you know what, I'm happy to just get a very slightly better position where, maybe it's not so easy for White to win, but where he's never really losing from this sort of situation either, realistically speaking. At this point, I think I like the move e4 for White, just opening up the diagonal for the bishop, preparing e5, and that would give White a little bit of an initiative to work with while black is still, figuring out how to get his c8 bishop into the game, as it were. But instead, white played b3, and maybe white perhaps was trying a little bit too hard just to hold a safe draw. Move like a4. Yes, yeah, accidentally pressed the thing to show all the moves, but yeah, basically from this point, just bear with me for 1 sec. Okay, fine, figure out how to remove the arrows. But yeah, I think I'd go a4 and just stop black playing b5, as it were. After a6, white just played bishop d3 and played the move knight e4, just trying to make a lot of exchanges happen. And Furusha, to his credit, realized that, white is not really threatening to take on c5. As after bishop b7 takes and takes, it turns out that, well, queen c5, queen d3 is just an exchange of the pieces, essentially. And a good one for black, we might add. Well, in the game, white played bishop takes b5, trying to win a pawn as such. But black played the counter trick of knight takes b3. So that after takes and takes, well, you don't have queen takes b5 anymore because of the bishop a6 skewer. So instead, white threw in the move rook d1, queen c7, and I mean, for the rest of the game, it was like never really straying too far from equality. I mean, it's true that I accidentally skipped all the way to the end there, but yeah, if we go a little bit further, we'll kind of see that, even though white didn't play it in the very best way, like knight d4 is allowing like some problems against g2, where white does something have to be a little bit precise to hold. But to Abbasov's credit, he found this very nice move of h4 in this position, where he sacrifices a pawn, but manages to neutralize the attack on his king after g3 take. And yeah, it's one of these positions where only black can win when he's a pawn up, but his extra pawn is just so inept here that it's just going to be a draw virtually every time. And I didn't check the game beforehand, but it seemed to me on a very casual glance that black didn't really get any special chances to win. White just continued to play very solidly. After takes, even realized that you can even enter a pawn ending a pawn less. Because, yeah, if they do play this sequence with king h6 and e4, for instance, yeah, you just go g4 and, just an ironclad draw at this point, regaining the pawn on e4, as it were. So black goes king h6, keeps the game going, and, yeah, just we have a lot of shuffling. Like, not much really happened from here. Black did manage to get this, get his pawns undoubled, so it does give him some small hopes, but yeah, unless white blunders into a losing king and pawn ending or something, it is just going to be a draw. Not just because of like all the pawns on one side of the board, but it's also just very hard for black to make any progress without allowing some sort of perpetual check. And if you do exchange pawns like it happened in the game, like that just brings white, every pawn trade just brings white one step closer to a draw. So yeah, not too much to see, like just, white was giving a more or less endless amount of checks and, white just has a fortress. So yeah, the game ended in a draw here. There's just no way for black to escape the perpetual check, as it were. So a pretty balanced game. You could say that Furusha maybe got the better side of the draw, but in the end, Abbasov did achieve his goal of making a solid draw of the white pieces with no risk and, yeah, being able to go on to the next game. Because, like, if you think about it, like, Abbasov's expected score and rating is something like 4.6 out of 13, out of 14, I believe. So, like, even if he scores, let's say, like, 6 out of 14, just, like, holding them all to draws, like, it actually, gets him a pretty decent chunk of rating points. Like, that would get him in the back in the world top 100, for example. Anyway, let's now see the next game here. This one was between Caruana and Gukesh, and yeah, this one, I think it was actually fairly balanced most of the way through, but let's have a look all the same. Actually, this is the first time that I'm seeing this particular game. But yeah, after d3, d6, so it's a game between two of the three co-leaders going into the round, and, modern Italian, this is all very, very standard. Like, the old main line was to, play rook e1 and, bishop b3 and go for these sorts of positions, let's say. But then it became a bit less popular when people realized that, you're not forced to play the automatic bishop a7, but, you can play moves like bishop e6 and, make the point that we don't really need to play bishop to a7, because, like, if bishop c2, even, knight g4 is actually a bit of a trap you have to watch out for, like take knight e3, and yeah, this is it's sort of an example of why you'll sort of see white often play moves like h3 immediately once once black is castled and it doesn't have h6, g5, g4. Anyway, I'm getting a bit distracted by the subtleties with the move orders, but this is just to give a couple ideas of how the Fury sort of developed over time, and why you'll sort of see white nowadays often play the move a4 in response to a6, just grabbing that space on the queen side and giving a hiding hole for the bishop against a later knight to a5. So bishop a7, h3 was played. And it's sort of interesting, it used to be thought that h3 was just a mistake because of h6 and g5, g4, but I think that Caruana was going to play bishop e3 and trade off the black bishop, which, does somewhat neutralize the idea of g5. So Gukesh just plays it very solidly, just castles, knight d2, rook e8, just preparing bishop e6 so that you can take back with the rook rather than with the pawn. And that's indeed how the game played out. b4, bishop e6, take. It's still pretty standard Fury, of course. Like, this has been played in a pretty decent chunk of games. If we put the move h6 on the board, then it comes to even more transpositions. I think normally they play like rook e1, and black will often go for like d5, but not sort of immediately. He'll kind of prepare it with moves like knight e7, knight g6, and only then think about d5. But yeah, in this opposition, I think white will have a little bit of pressure with the queenside play, but black is also going to be very solid as well with normal moves as such. Anyway, the game went rook e8, black side to retreat the rook voluntarily, and with white continuing the normal Lopez maneuver of bringing the knight towards g3 and also freeing the bishop in the process. I really like black's next move of d5, just taking control of that center is one of black's main plans in this variation. White keeps attention with knight g3, realizing that, well, it also comes up in the game, but, realizing that this exchange is something that, white's quite happy to see, because black then lost his space advantage, and, we can try to make use of the f5 square as well. You can sort of tell this game that, like, Gukesh playing against the top seed in Caruana, the only player rate over 2,800 in the tournament, and actually in the world other than Carlsen. You could tell that he was just trying to neutralize white's pressure and just make a solid draw when he played this move of b5. Not sure if b5 is necessarily ideally timed here, though. I think I would probably want to keep things a little bit more flexible and play like queen d7 first before like really committing in a way. Because in the game, after knight f5, take, and knight e7, I think this is probably the point where maybe white lost a little bit of his advantage. I think that even a move like knight hg4, knight 3h4, and just kind of keeping the knight on f5, I think is going to give white quite a pleasant advantage. Because we kind of have the key of when that a file opens, and even a move like c4 is also a thing here, where you can prepare moves like c5 to try and shut out and the black bishop and completely dominate the play. And if they take to avoid that, well, now the pawns are split, and we can sort of see how the accumulation of these little strategic advantages can add up for white in this case. So I think that while the engine gives a few moves of being similar value, I do kind of like knight 3h4 a lot from the human point of view. But in the game, white decided to take the pawn on e5, a little bit greedy, and I think that, after takes, black could play a move like knight d5, just sort of preparing to, go queen h4, knight f4, and get counterplay in this way. Gukesh in the game went for the move c5, which white played bishop f4 in response, and based on the way black played next, it probably was more precise to flick this in first and just have that little bit of a pin against the bishop, as it were. Though, to be fair, even here, I think bishop b6 and, inviting some exchanges should still, I think, be playable for black. White is up a pawn and, can try to make something of it in this instance. In the game after bishop f4, black found a move which I really like quite a lot. Because at first glance, ba4 definitely looks like a positional mistake that you're just weakening the structure. But it's not so simple, because if you play queen takes a4, then black is going to take, and queen b4 runs in a knight d5, but if cb4, you run some tactics as well with bishop takes and queen d4, and you actually end up making a draw here with king f3, queen h5, queen d5, because you don't want to run into knight h5 obviously, and you also don't want to lose your bishop. So that's where the draw comes from in that case. Realizing this, Caruana flicked in the move knight c6 first and trade off some pieces, but then the position is just so simplified that there's not much White can really do. You might be expecting Black just takes a knight, but Black played a small wrinkle of flicking in queen d4 first, just being especially precise, prompting a slightly passive queen c1 before taking the knight. Take queen b7, and I mean White's extra pawn just doesn't really have any value because the position is just so simplified, and Black is going to put the pressure on the b4 pawn very quickly, as we can see. So the game continued knight d5, and this was a bit of a long game, but it was one where there was never really any point where there was a big opportunity for either player. So we're just gonna fast forward a little bit. The rookie one's not necessary, but it is a nice touch. Realizing that queen e6 is just nothing for White. Black is going to get back the pawn in the next few moves. So White goes g4, and again, much like the previous game, we have this pawn upending where Caruana tries to squeeze blood out of a stone, but again, the problem is that the White king is too exposed, and as long as you don't, self-destruct, trade the queen to the bad moment as Black, then yeah, White's never going to be able to break through. Obviously, yeah, you don't want to run into, I mean, queen doesn't even do anything, but you don't want to run into a queen trade, for example, here. But yeah, after queen g1, Black just keeps giving checks. And, well, if Black plays queen b4, that's what happened in the game. Queen a6, and yeah, just all the pawns on one side of the board just makes this just an ironclad draw. They played on some more moves, because, I mean, you don't really lose anything by trying here as White, but as you can see, Black's just going to keep giving checks or just being annoying in general with the queen. And yeah, I mean, as long as you avoid your king getting mate in a mating net, then yeah, it's just going to be a draw. And at this point, the players did, in fact, agree a draw at this point. Now, our final game here, and this one was really a quite brilliant game by Nepomniachtchi, where he managed to win against Vidit in the Berlin endgame, actually, which you actually don't see that much at a high level anymore. Nowadays, you see more Rook E1 or, D3 was played in Nakamura Vidit earlier in the tournament, for instance, in the round 2. But yeah, after knight d6, take, d5, we do get the Berlin endgame. Also, comment below, is this the first recap of mine you're seeing, or have you seen all of them? Definitely interested to know how many of them you have seen thus far. So at this point, Black has a pretty wide assortment of plans where if Black is wanting to maximize his winning chances, he'll usually go bishop d7 and try to bring the king over to the queen side, which is what Vidit did in this game. Whereas if Black is looking more just to make a solid draw, you'll more often see this sort of dark light squared blockade approach, where it makes sense. Black has an unopposed light squared bishop here, so therefore the idea of just blockading on these light squares and just not letting White just run them over in the king side is a pretty natural approach. We have a lot of theory from here, but if Black has done his homework, I mean White is just never White just never really getting through in this sort of position. Knight g5, rook h6, and you can do your homework from here if you're interested in these positions. But this is the main defensive machination for Black, let's say. So Black goes bishop d7 and h3 again, just to it's not really even a waiting move. You are preparing moves like g4 in the future, and if you do play king c8 a bit too early, you're running into g4, and we can kind of see how White is managing to start getting his pawns moving forward in a position like this. So Black plays h6 just to avoid knight g5 and just kind of remove the pieces around like so. With g4, knight e7, knight h2, a little bit of a prophylaxis against h5, which was something of a strategic threat for Black. Now h5 does give us the option of playing bishop g5, which of course we couldn't do when the pawn was on h6. As you're probably guessing, yeah, we're going to spend the most time by some margin analyzing this game, because we saw the first 3 games kind of petered out relatively quickly, but this was actually a really hard-fought battle. It was interesting even beyond being a decisive game. And with g5, we can see that Black is really wanting to round up this pawn on e5 and try to turn it into a weakness. Really, this is sort of the main idea of the Berlin, if you think about it, is just to neutralize White's kingside majority. making the point without being able to use it in some way that white just can't make any sort of progress. White plays the move f4 in response, opening things up a bit and allowing him to defend this pawn with the bishop. As after something like this, for example, we can see how that plays out. Black plays the move bishop e6 just kind of as an anticipation of the pressure against f7, but also making the very valid point that the knight may also go to d5 as well as g6. That's just nice to have that bit of extra flexibility. White played the move knight e4, eyeing the hole on f6, and it's kind of an interesting point actually about this sort of position that the knight actually doesn't do all that much on f6. Like, it's a good square, but black can sort of play around it. Like, for example, in a position like this, if black decides to develop in this way, prioritizing kingside development, yeah, knight f6 is a good move for white, but it just doesn't really do all that much. Like, black can play king c8 and push the queenside pawns, and I mean, it's not really an easy way for white to make progress. I'm guessing maybe in this case Nepo might have gone for something like h4 and tried to sort of stymie the black knight a bit in this sort of way and fix the pawn on h6 as a weakness. But of course black is always going to be fine in the Berlin. Like even b5 as a way to try to create some counterplay on this flank and bring the knight around and such. But yeah, that would be a very different game, of course. And in the game, black played the move b6, sort of preparing to bring the king around this way. It's not absolutely the most precise point to the engine, but I don't think we can really criticize it so much either. This is all very thematic for this opening. King b7. White just bring his king into the action, just preparing to advance his kingside pawns at the right moment. And yeah, the move a5 is one that the engine somewhat surprisingly sort of thinks that the inclusion of these moves is actually going to be in white's favor here. The reason why is a little bit beyond my current understanding, but it is true, yeah, that if you play knight d5 immediately, it is maybe a little bit more direct. And I guess the point is also that, like, let's say, not that white should take, but it kind of demonstrates the point that, in this instance, like with the pawn a2, you may be able to, get away with taking this pawn in some cases. Like b3, c4 is, kind of the reason why the bishop isn't just getting trapped here. Like if you play knight d2, there's, takes and there's moves like bishop b4 to save the bishop, or even rook d8 and, planning this little rook takes d2. And I know I'm going a little bit down the weeds of this engine line, but it's sort of instructive to see this kind of position as being sort of the dream for black, where having those free connected passes and why not easily being able to make an effective pass pawn on the king side means that this would actually be a strategically winning position for black, and it's a good example of how black can win hypothetically in the Berlin endgame when he gets this sort of imbalance on the board. But yeah, in the game, black played a5, and yeah, we can now sort of see the difference that knight d5 can now be well met by rook a d1 because there's no a2 pawn hanging at the end here. But white plays the move a3 instead, which does allow black to fix these pawns, which I think is not really ideal from white's point of view. When rook a d1, knight c6 is a nice move. White played c3 to try and stymie the knight with the distance 4 concept. It is true this does allow the knight to come into c4, but I mean that was going to be a problem whatever way you play it as white. In the game, black played the move bishop to e7, also a perfectly fine move. At this point, again, I think the Soviet idea of going h4 and fixing the pawn as a weakness is definitely a move I would consider quite seriously as white. And I mean, also at the right moment, you can even go g5 then and have an actual passed pawn to work with. This would probably come up quite late into the endgame. But in the game, Nepo went knight h4, perhaps with ideas of trying to bring the knight into f5. Black played a quite nice move h5 in response, realizing that if you do take the pawn, that you're running into some tactics with takes and rook g8. And whatever way you defend it, you're going to be losing the knight on h4, essentially. So Nepo played the move g5 to stabilize on the king side. Black played quite creative rook a5, rook d1, rook b5. And actually this position I wrote about on my Facebook feed recently as a kind of interesting point, like when you're defending, there's this concept of economic defense where you want to defend as efficiently as possible. So, the best move for white here is to play rook f2 and defend the pawn with the rook. But we can also kind of see the logic of why Nepo played bishop c1. Because in theory, the bishop is a better defender of the pawn than the rook, because the rook is a more valuable piece. The flip side of it here, though, is that if black were to play the move c4, well, then this bishop pawn is quite poorly defended, and you sort of wish the bishop was back here to cover it. Because if white now plays the move knight f3 to defend, black has this little trick of h4, of being able to kind of either open up the center very much in his favor for the bishops, or after king g2, we kind of see how the pawn h3 is sort of fixed as a weakness. And, in this case, I think it's actually black is the one who is pressing with the, white piece being very much tied to the weak pawns. Like, if you play rook e4, like, you're not even really threatening to take h4, because then the pawn on e5 will come under fire. But yeah, very interesting position for sure. It is true that after rook fe1 that there are some kind of engine-like ideas, like, for example, one of the key points it's very hard to appreciate in the heat of battle is that, here, black can actually sacrifice the exchange with the point of bringing the knight into d3 and just having this really strong attack on the white position. But yeah, this is obviously not the easiest thing to appreciate in the game. Also, kind of an instructive note that, an ending like this, kind of a bit like we saw before, this sort of ending is actually going to be very good for black, where the outside passed pawn is surprisingly difficult for white to deal with his piece on the king side being so far away. But yeah, in the game, black instead played the move rook b3, which is ultimately a step in the wrong direction. I think that Vidit's idea was that he'd be able to go b5, b4 and involve the rook back in the game that way. But it ultimately just proves a little bit too slow here. For some reason, the Indian really likes the idea of h4 and just fixing the pawn as a weakness first before taking it. But from my human point of view, I can't really see anything wrong with the way Nepo played it either. Just take the pawn and be a pawn up. Okay, I guess to be fair in this position after rook d3 and take, black does have bishop h3, so I guess that kind of explains why h4 first is a bit more precise. But even here, white's still got very good chances to win. The passed pawn is definitely a thing, and bishop g5 is a threat to help that pawn get moving. Black plays the move b5 in response, where after bishop g5, now knight d5 can be played, and you're not going to be worrying about a c4 move as such. So the game continued e7, bishop d7, and very precise, well, a nice move by white here in rook d1, where if you're wondering, well, why not just promote the pawn to a queen? Well, white can do this, but what's going to happen is that these pawns are all going to get, hoovered off the board, and, white can't really play for a win in that case without any pawns to turn to a queen in the endgame, even with an extra piece. So white plays a move rook d1 to kind of keep the pressure on. It turns out that probably rook e5 is the most precise here, in fact. Kind of provoke the move c6 and play this obstacle bishop position. This is what the engine wants to do, but I do think that if black plays b4, he should get enough counterplay to draw this fairly comfortably. So from a practical point of view, I do like Nepo's move of keeping a bit more tension in the position. Also, it kind of helps that king c6 by black was a bit of a mistake, and that, funnily enough, actually you can let the knight be taken, which might seem a little bit weird, but we are threatening this knight in turn, and after knight g7 and bishop c6, once again it turns out that even though black would be down a piece in this position, black is sacking a knight to avoid e8 equals queen, but it's very interesting to see that actually here black is probably again able to save himself, where we don't have time to take the pawn because of the rook g2 skewer, but after rook d3, black is sort of kind of alright here, where he's able to, for example, play like, the machine is wanting to go bishop d7 and even, get some little tricks in, let's say, but if white does a sidestep, black can bring the king in, and, obviously only white can really play for a win when he's up a piece, but it's not that easy for white to make progress. There is the weakness of the pawns being a factor, and yeah, if black plays it correctly, he will ultimately hold, something like this would be a kind of typical sequence where, it's, again, clear that white is pressing, but just very hard just to break Black's fortress with the idea of just trading off White's pawns essentially. But yeah, this isn't what happened in the game. In the game, Black played King C6, King E4, and again, you just have to sack the piece and just hope for the best, because in the game to move Bishop E8, trying to get into an ending like this, unfortunately fails, because after the move Bishop C1, the Rook is just out of the game for just that little bit too long here, where after Bishop G6, King E5, and B4, White just played the move King F6, realizing that take is just allowing the pawn a free run to queen. And after Bishop E8, Rook D8, Black is still losing a piece, but in a substantially worse version of what we saw before. As well, after Bishop D7 and King F7, Black just resigned here, because you're not just losing a piece, but the White pawn is actually queening by force. If Rook to C3, just Rook D7, and yeah, the E3 square is covered, so White just wins. So yeah, very nice game by Pomnishi, and a good one to close out our training video as well, or at the very least this recap video explaining the ideas behind these games. Also to conclude, just to let you know that then tomorrow is going to be a rest day, so it's not going to be a recap video. I've got a nice little opening video prepared on a variation that I think most of you will not have heard of before. Actually, even I hadn't really heard of it till quite recently. So I think you're going to really enjoy that. And yeah, if you are interested in getting some private lessons with me, like you enjoy my style of, presenting some ideas and feel like, it resonates with you, then you can reach out to me via either my messenger link below, which is probably the best, or you can email me. That works fine as well. I do check the messenger a little bit more often, let's say. But yeah, in any case, I hope that you enjoyed this recap, and I will see you for the next one. Take care.